What do we want? Climate justice! When do we want it? Now! What do we want? Climate justice! When do we want it? Now!
So, looks like it was slightly decreasing, actually. It wasn't quite as, the El Nino.
Scientists from the pits of hell, how dare you take from Yahweh the sovereign right over the weather?
La Nina was slightly decreasing. We've had it 3 years, a strong one, but you can see some warmer water is starting to come across. Remember, this is the anomaly. We're still in the La Nina. And then this is the salinity anomaly relative to 1981 to 2010 baseline and relative to 2021. And you can see these areas here are getting much, much saltier. These areas here, much, much saltier. You know, this whole area. So the Atlantic is getting much, much saltier. The Pacific generally is getting less salty. And this reflects the rainfall patterns that fall on the water. This is this is now separate. It's a regional thing. Sorry, it's sideways. Just tilt your head. So it divides it into the regions. It looks at the. This is the regionally upper 0 to 2,000 meters ocean heat content change from 1958 through 2022. So you can see northern Pacific, you know, started going up in about 2000. Southern Ocean, you know, a rise, increasing more and more. North Pacific, there was some fluctuation, but rising now. And these are where the different regions are taken, like these squares are where the data was taken. Indian Ocean, tremendous warming since 2000. North Atlantic, warming ramped up around 2000. You know, everything seemed to break around 2000. This is the Mediterranean, started rising earlier, around 1990. And it's interesting, the tropical Atlantic, just a steady rise up. Didn't have that break. So the break in around 2000-ish is due to the Arctic amplification greatly increasing, I think. This is the ocean heat content 2003 to 2012, ocean heat content anomaly. So look at all this heating in the Arctic, especially in the, you know, causing the North Atlantic water to heat tremendous amounts. And this is 2013 to 2022. So this is over the last 20 years. This is over the last 10 years. So look at that, like, it's tremendous warming. I mean, things have broken in the system. We're getting tremendous warming here and here, and even in the southern hemisphere ocean. Okay, so let's have a look at some of the conclusions. So there were two international groups, the IAP/CAS, which is mostly China, and the US, NOAA, and CEI. They looked at ocean heat content, salinity, and stratification in 2022. They used different approaches, but they both have consistent results. The oceans are continuing to warm globally, with yet another new 0 to 2,000 meter ocean heat content record reached in 2022. The inexorable climb in ocean temperatures is the inevitable outcome of Earth's energy imbalance, primarily associated with increasing concentrations of greenhouse gases. The global long-term warming trend is so steady and robust that annual records continue to be set with each new year, even though we've been in a cooling ENSO cycle, you know, a La Nina for 3 years. So when we switch to the El Nino, it's going to be basically horrible, okay? The salinity contrast index is increased, so there's more extreme salinity anomalies, and this means that the global water cycle is being amplified, and it's imprinting on the upper ocean measurements. Regional warming patterns are shown. There's hot spots and cold spots, but all basins have experiencing some warming. There's internal variability superimposed. And so, in addition to the ocean metrics presented in this study, other changes indicating ocean health that can be included in future studies are ocean oxygen change and pH. Okay, this didn't look at the ocean acidity or the oxygen levels, but that'll probably be included when they, you know, do a study on next year of showing this. Okay, so this is a very key paper, open source. And of course, the warmer ocean temperatures, we're getting, record relentless rain, record heat. Climate crisis is being worsened. Extreme weather is worsening. This is a recent article in The Guardian from this year, and they talk about relentless drought in California, extreme rainfall in the UK, record heat in China. Those were, in the last year, but don't forget, this year we've had relentless rainfall in California. This is a good example of what I call weather weirding. The analysis of extreme events in 2021 and 2022 found that many of these extremes were worsened by global heating. In some cases would have been almost impossible in terms of their severity if humans had not altered the climate through the burning of fossil fuels. So there's so-called climate attribution studies which look at those very things. How much are these events warming because of climate change?
There's a lot to unpack there, and the role they might play. Obviously, your average temperature on the south side of the barn is going to be higher than on the north side of the barn. So the question is okay, what is the true measure of the average temperature? Well, do you add those together and just have them? Or how do you do that? Well, you have to have a lot of data points in a lot of different environments to do that. So what has happened is that temperature measuring stations have gone from being mostly rural to very urban. And this has happened over a period of decades, over the last 50, 60 years. So if you have an airport that was rural 50 years ago, and now it's in the middle of the suburbs, you're going to have a warmer temperature, clearly.
Isn't this why satellite temperature data is generally more reliable?
Yes.
Okay?
That's right. Yes. So I'll go back to, this is basically your textbook right here. This is Frederick Lütgens and Edward J. Tarbuck, who wrote a series of classical textbooks back in the 70s and 80s, probably even to the 90s, that were used in, geology, meteorology, climatology classes, etc., environmentalist classes. So this is from 1986. This was the take. So we this urban heat island has been a factor really since the 19th century. I think the first guy that wrote about it was writing about it maybe in the 1880s, 1870s even, and it was about the difference between temperatures in London and then in rural England outside of London. So the awareness of the urban heat island effect goes back at least a century, probably a century and a half even. Okay, so that's what they'll say here. This is one of the textbooks they wrote. It's called The Atmosphere, an introduction to meteorology. The most apparent human impact on climate is the modification of the atmospheric environment by the building of cities. You see what I said here? The most apparent human impact on climate is the modification of the atmospheric environment by the building of cities. The construction of every factory, road, office building, and house destroys existing microclimates and creates new ones of great complexity. As far back as the early 19th century, here we go, Luke Howard, the Englishman who is most remembered for his cloud classification scheme, here we go, recognized that the weather in London was different from that of the surrounding rural countryside. Indeed, with the coming of the Industrial Revolution in the 1800s, the trend toward urbanization accelerated, leading to significant changes in the climate in and near most cities.
Where was that? Going back to your reference that consensus is required for an IPCC report to go out.
Right.
You, on your website, and I quote you, let me actually find it. You said, you argued that a scientist admitting that we don't need more study of an issue is stunning. So this is hard for me to digest because this implies that, science is settled, which by definition contradicts the essence of what science is, as the, axiomatic nature of science is further exploration because there are always more accurate explanations. Question mark.
but some science is settled.
But how? When there are so many scientists that disagree with the consensus, how is it settled?
We know what the rate of acceleration of a falling object is. We know what the global average temperature of the planet is. We know what the temperature of the oceans are, different places around the globe. We know what the salinity of the oceans are around the world. There are a lot of things that we actually know with great certainty, and science as a process contributes to that great certainty through the peer-reviewed process by being conservative and leading, therefore, to reliable knowledge that anybody will agree with. That leads now. Is the world a complex place? Is climate change complex? Yes, absolutely. There's no question about that. But there are some things that we know with great certainty that would take a stunning change in information to disprove. And that's the case with many of the elements, not just of climate change, but various other aspects of the world.
Well, two of the, fundamental premises upon which you base your argument that we are in the midst of abrupt climate change is that the evidence of extreme weather events are unprecedented in nature and severity are clear evidence of that, and also the highest recorded temperatures have occurred recently. However, other scientists, climate scientists, have argued that the paleoclimate records indicate severe and very extreme weather events that are in no way less significant than what we're experiencing now. And also, just as a direct example, in an interview with Dr. John Christie, who pioneered the satellite data temperature recordings, he said that over the last 43 years, there has been a 0.5 degrees Celsius increase in temperature. And also, invalidated the claim that extreme weather events are unprecedented because the data being looked at spans about 40 years. So it's a very, very small sample, and it skews any kind of conclusion that can be drawn from it. So what do you say to that?
I'm confused because yes, there have been extreme weather events, and yes, the temperature of the planet has increased greatly in the past 43 years, in the last 50 years, and the last 100 years.
Would you say that a 0.5 degrees Celsius increase is a great increase?
Yes, absolutely.
So you concur that that is a reliable conclusion in terms of temperature increase?
Yes, we're in the midst of the most rapid temperature increase, as even the IPCC admits, as I indicated in their October 8th, 2018 report, global warming of 1.5 degrees. Yes, the temperature is rising very rapidly. And that's what's driving the mass extinction event. That's what's causing the ongoing mass extinction event in which we're embedded, at least the 9th mass extinction event. And so on some of these issues, there is no disagreement between the the consensus of paid climate scientists and the people who find themselves out of favor with that group. But that doesn't mean we're in the midst of a cooling event, as some people say. We're not going into an ice age. You know, people point very frequently to the 1970s when they said, but scientists said in the 1970s we were entering an ice age, therefore they can't be believed. Well,
sorry to disappoint.
Finding at that time was that we are headed into, and in fact we're currently already in, the midst of a global heating event. And we still are. And there's actual data to support that point using thermometers.
If, as you say, it is a global heating event, though, does that not in itself imply that it is a natural cycle of, you know, the planet's cooling and heating?
No, it's not. It's not.
For lack of a better word.
It's not natural at all. It's not all cycles. Yes, there were warming events in the past. Yes, there were cooling events in the past. And as I indicated, the warming that it naturally occurred was due to a slight wobble in the Earth, referred to as the Milankovitch cycle. What's going on right now is far in excess of those temperature changes that were recorded in the past based on proxy records. So we're beyond the notion of relatively gradual climate change. The kind of thing I was studying in the early 1980s when I was in graduate school was gradual changes in global average temperature. What we're in now, what we're in the midst of now, is a much more rapid rate of change than we've ever observed, even using proxy records like tree rings and so on.
And it's this rapid warming that you believe is going to engage the release of 50, I don't know what the metric is, but from methane gas from the Arctic. You mentioned that there were 3 primary sources of methane release, and that this will be the end of humanity on Earth.
Again, this is according to Natalia Shikova and her research team, based on their findings. And they have predicted, even in the absence of an ice-free Arctic, even if we maintain ice in the Arctic Ocean, which seems unlikely to persist very much longer, but even if it does, they predicted a 50 gigaton burst of methane, which would profoundly and much more rapidly than is currently going on warm the planet. And we can't take any more warming because the environment is changing so quickly already that vertebrates and mammals can't keep up. We're vertebrate mammals. We should be concerned.
But other climate scientists have argued that even if we do get to the point where this methane, you know, the event happens that will release this methane, that the amount of methane released will not do the damage perceived by some.
It has forced me to live with. It has forced me to live with urgency. It has forced me to accept Homer's statement in the Iliad, written nearly 2,000 years ago. Any moment might be our last. Any moment might be my last. I live with purpose. I live with integrity. I do things that I think are important, including this conversation, so that other people will know that their lives are not infinite. That, as Gabor Mate said, accepting inevitability is not a bad idea. We are all going to die, and every one of us will think, that was short. When we come to the end, I don't know of anybody who says, man, I had a really long life. I think 75 years is enough. Right? Nobody says that, no matter how long it is.
I hear you.
So I'm presenting the evidence. I'm just presenting the evidence.
And there's virtue in that. You know, I mean, we should be doing this anyway. Living every day with, it might be our last.
Right.
Whether or not people will react to this kind of realization in that way is, I would argue, very, very unlikely, especially the first, 2 years and 361 days, but should aspire towards.
People ask me all the time, how much time do I have? And from an individual perspective, people say, how much time do I have? Professor McPherson, how much time do I have? And I tell them, you have 3 minutes. You have 3 minutes, and with every breath, you get a reset. Live like it. Live like every breath matters. Because it does. Live like every moment matters. We made it this long. There's a paper in the renowned series of journals, the annual reviews. There's a paper in the 2012 annual review of Earth and Planetary Sciences that projected an ice-free Arctic Ocean in 2016 plus or minus 3 years. When we have that first ice-free Arctic Ocean, it will generate the equivalent of 1 trillion tons of carbon dioxide emissions. So far on this planet, we, through industrial activity, have generated 36.5 billion tons. So we're talking about an enormous release of heating into the atmosphere.
This was projected for 2016.
2016 plus or minus 3 years. And here we are. It was wrong.
Exactly.
And it was wrong because they used a linear projection. So they have relatively few data points. I think they had 12 data points at the time. And the last year, 2007, was the lowest one so far. So pushed it down to 2016 plus or minus 3 years. So every day I wish for the science to be wrong in the way that science was wrong. Every day.
Well, okay, keep in mind that surface currents are the result of wind blowing on the water. The wind blows across the water, it pushes the water in motion, and then and usually the water, there's a deflection of about 45 degrees or so from the wind direction, and you then create pressure gradient because you have water higher in certain places, lower in other places, so then water flows downhill, and then Coriolis acts on the water, and you get some very nice local gyres that result from balancing the pressure gradient with the Coriolis and so on. But it all comes from the wind blowing across the water. That's surface currents. Now, with the changing jet streams and the changing temperature gradient, the wind directions might change. So if the wind directions might change, therefore then the water direction might change, which means the surface currents might change. What will happen, so that's this is very, very broad, and that's talking about horizontal surface currents. The key thing is going to be the vertical currents, the thermohaline flow. With the increased stratification, this is slowing down. That's, and with the warming oceans, we get the increased stratification, you're going to get decreased thermohaline, decreased vertical currents. So
Jean, did you get all that? Did she get it? You can rewind it and re-listen. All right, let's see. Who did we have?
That is an extremely broad overview. You can take graduate courses for an entire semester studying this stuff.
Oh yeah, I'm sure you can.
And I've done that. It's all fluid dynamics.
All right.
The problem with global warming is a pile of crap. The problem with climate change is there's never been a day in the history of the world in which the climate is not changing.
The climate on Mars is changing, and Mars doesn't have any SUVs on it.
It's in the interests of the left to have destructive hurricanes, because then they can blame it on climate change.
The ice caps were going to melt, they were going to be gone by now, but now they're setting records, okay?
A hearing on Capitol Hill on global warming was canceled because of snow in Washington, D.C. You can't make this stuff up.
It's a snowball, and that's just from outside here. So it's very, very cold out.
I found it ironic the president was wearing a trench coat. It was so cold, and he's talking about global warming.
It's not global warming. It's God's judgment coming to this country.
Environmentalism has become a radical movement, something we call the Green Dragon. when I was 6 or something like that. I opened up a birthday present that I didn't like, and the person that gave me the gift was there. And, it just crushed that person. And you think, well, that's kind of how we're treating God when he's given us these gifts of abundant and inexpensive fuel sources. Right. God's buried those treasures there because he loves to see us find them.
We were put on this earth as creatures of God to have dominion over the earth for our benefit, not for the earth's benefit.
One hurricane is the equivalent of 10,000 nuclear weapons. So every year we've got like 2 million nuclear weapons going off, and the planet still seems to be in pretty good shape. So what is it we think we're going to do to damage the planet?
And we have more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere now, which is actually greening the planet.
It's greening the planet.
It's greening the planet.
That's good.
Yes, it is.
If you believe that mankind is causing climate change, you're deceived by Satan.
This is the real solution to climate change. Babies.
From Hollywood.